There's a moment that changes everything. It doesn't happen with a bang. There's no dramatic exit, no explosive confrontation. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. One day you simply stop. You stop answering the phone when you don't have the energy. You stop saying yes when your whole body is screaming no. You stop smiling just to make someone else comfortable. And for the first time in your life, you feel something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not anxiety, but stillness. And it terrifies you, because you spent your entire life being the one who feels everything, the one who carries other people's sadness like it's your own, the one who walks into a room and immediately knows who's hurting, who's pretending, who's about to fall apart. You've been the listener, the healer, the fixer, the one everyone calls when they need to feel understood. But nobody ever asks how you're doing. Not really. And here's what no one tells you about being an empath. It doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down slowly, one favor at a time, one conversation where you gave everything and received nothing, one night where you lay in bed completely hollow, wondering where you went. Carl Jung saw this coming over a century ago. He understood something about people like you that most of the world still doesn't. That your empathy is not just a personality trait, it is a psychological structure. And when that structure is used only in service of others, never turned inward, never honored, never protected, it begins to collapse. But here's what Jung also knew. That collapse, it's not the end of you, it's the beginning. Today we're going to walk through something rare, something most people will never talk about because it makes them uncomfortable. We are going to explore what happens psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally when the empath finally stops pleasing everyone, when they put the mask down, when they choose themselves for the first time. And we're going to do it through the lens of one of the most brilliant minds in human history. So stay with us. Because if you've ever felt guilty for needing to pull away, if you've ever wondered whether something is wrong with you for not wanting to keep giving, you may discover today that what you thought was breaking down was actually breaking open. And before we begin, take a moment. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Have you ever reached that moment where you just couldn't keep giving anymore? I want to hear your story. Part 1, The Empath's Wound, Why You Were Built to Feel Everything. Let's start at the beginning, not the beginning of your problems, the beginning of you. You didn't choose to be this way. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to feel the emotional temperature of every room you walk into. You didn't sign up to absorb other people's anxiety like a sponge dropped into water. It was just always there. This ability, this curse, this gift that nobody gave you the instructions for. As a child, you probably sensed things others missed. You knew when your mother was pretending to be fine. You could feel the tension between your parents, even when no words were spoken. You noticed the kids sitting alone at the edge of the playground, and something in your chest ached for them before you even understood why. Jung would say you were born with a heightened connection to what he called the collective unconscious. This is the deep layer of the psyche that exists beneath your personal thoughts and memories. It's where the shared emotional patterns of all humanity live, archetypes, symbols, primal feelings that connect us across time and culture. Most people have a thick wall between their conscious mind and this deeper layer. They move through life relatively shielded from the undercurrents. But your wall is thin, almost transparent. You don't just sense emotions, you receive them. They flow into you like water through cloth. And when you were young, this wasn't seen as a gift. It was seen as a problem. You were told you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. You cried too easily. You worried too much about others. You took things too personally. So what did? You You adapted. You learned that the way to survive in a world that doesn't understand deep feeling is to become useful. If you couldn't stop feeling everything, then at least you could make that feeling serve a purpose. You became the helper, the caretaker, the one who always knew the right thing to say, the one who held everyone together, and it worked. People loved you for it. They came to you with their pain, and you absorbed it. They came to you with their confusion, and you organized it. They came to you with their loneliness, and you filled it. And every single time a little piece of you disappeared. Jung described this pattern with terrifying clarity. He said that when a person builds their identity entirely around their persona, the mask they show the world, the true self begins to starve. You become so good at being what others need that you forget what you need. You become so skilled at reading the room that you stop reading yourself. And it started so early. Think about the praise you received as a child. Was it ever for being yourself? Or was it always for being useful? You're such a good helper. You're so mature for your age. I don't know what we'd do without you. Those words felt like love. They sounded like love, but they were actually assignments. They were telling you in the gentlest possible language that your role in this family, in this world, was to serve. And you took that assignment and you ran with it, because what child doesn't want to be loved? What child doesn't want to hear that they're good? You discovered the formula early. I give, therefore I am valued. I sacrifice, therefore I am seen. I put myself last, therefore I belong. That formula became your operating system, and it worked beautifully for everyone except you. Jung saw this in his patients over and over again, people who had been conditioned to believe that their worth was external, that it lived in the approval of others, in the gratitude of others, in the need of others. He called this a fundamental alienation from the self, not a small thing, a catastrophe of the inner world, because a person who only knows themselves through the mirror of other people's needs has no idea who they actually are. And that's the empath's wound. Not that you feel too much, but that you were never taught that your feeling was meant for you too. Your empathy was always directed outward, toward the friend in crisis, the partner who needed reassurance, the stranger who looked lost. But when did you last turn that same compassion inward? When did you last sit with your own pain the way you sit with everyone else's? The answer for most empaths is almost never, and that is where the trouble begins, because your psyche keeps a ledger. Not consciously, not intentionally, but deep in the unconscious, there is a record of every time you abandoned yourself to serve someone else, every time you swallowed your own needs, every time you smiled when you wanted to scream, every time you said, "I'm fine," when you were falling apart inside. And one day, that ledger comes due. Jung called this the return of the repressed. What you push down doesn't disappear. It sinks into the unconscious, and it waits, and it grows. And when it finally surfaces, it doesn't come as a polite suggestion. It comes as exhaustion, as numbness, as a sudden inability to care about the very people you've spent your whole life caring for. And that terrifies you, because if you're not the one who cares, who are you? That question, that exact question, is where transformation begins. Part 2, the mask that kept you safe, understanding the persona. Let's talk about the mask. Because you've been wearing one for so long that you might not even realize it's there anymore. Jung called it the persona. It comes from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. And that's exactly what it is, a performance, a carefully constructed version of yourself that you present to the world, Now, everyone has a persona. The professional version of you at work, the polite version of you at family dinners, the charming version of you at social gatherings. This is normal and necessary. Without a persona, you would have no way of navigating social life. It is a psychological tool for engagement. But for the empath, the persona becomes something different. It becomes a survival mechanism, and eventually a prison. Think about this. When you walk into a room full of people, what is the first thing that happens inside you? Before a single word is spoken, you scan, you read, you assess. Who is comfortable? Who is anxious? Who needs attention? Who is hiding something? You do this automatically without even thinking. And then, just as automatically, you adjust yourself. You modulate your voice to match the energy of the room. You become softer around someone who is fragile, more energetic around someone who is fragile, more energetic around someone who is down, more agreeable around someone who is volatile. You shape-shift. You become whatever the situation requires. This is your persona at work. And for empaths, it is extraordinarily sophisticated. You don't just have one mask, you have dozens. One for each person in your life, one for your mother, one for your boss, one for your partner, one for the stranger at the grocery store who looks like they're having a bad day. And every single one of those masks costs you energy. Jung warned about this. He said that the more identified you become with your persona, the further you drift from your true self. And for the empath, this drift can become enormous. You can spend years, decades even, being so attuned to what others need from you that you completely lose touch with what you need from yourself. Have you ever had this experience? Someone asks you what you want for dinner, and you genuinely don't know. Not because you're indecisive, but because you spent so long prioritizing everyone else's preferences that your own have gone silent. Or someone asks you how you're feeling and you start describing how the people around you are feeling instead. You can map everyone else's emotional landscape with perfect accuracy, but your own is a blank. That's the persona doing its work. That's the mask becoming the face. And here is the painful truth that Jung understood. The empath's persona is the hardest to take off because it is built on love beautiful. It is built on love, on genuine care, on a real desire to ease suffering. It's not fake in the way a salesman's smile is fake. It comes from a real place, but it is still a mask. Because underneath it, there is a person who is hurting, a person who is tired, a person who has been giving from an empty cup for so long that the cup has cracked, and the world doesn't want you to take that mask off. The world loves the version of you that says yes, that shows up, that makes everything okay. Your family is comfortable with it, your friends rely on it, your partner has built their sense of security on it. So when you start to feel the mask slipping, when you start to feel that deep bone level exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix, you don't take the mask off. You grip it tighter. You push harder. You tell yourself you just need more rest, more coffee, more willpower. You tell yourself you just need more rest, more coffee, more willpower. You tell yourself that good people don't get tired of held tight, that strong people don't need boundaries, that loving people don't say no. And Jung would look at you with those piercing eyes of his and say, that is not strength, that is self-destruction dressed in virtue. Because the persona, when it takes over completely, doesn't just hide the true self, it buries it. And the true self, buried alive, doesn't go quietly. It fights back through depression, through anxiety, through sudden bursts of anger that seem to come from nowhere, through physical symptoms, headaches, stomach problems, chronic fatigue. Your body begins to scream what your mouth refuses to say. This is not a breakdown. This is a message. Your psyche sending up a flare. Your unconscious pounding on the door you sealed shut and shouting, I am still here. I am still real. And I need you to come back to me. The day the empath stops pleasing everyone begins right here, at the moment when the mask becomes heavier than the face beneath it, when the cost of pretending exceeds the cost of being honest, when the exhaustion finally outweighs the guilt, and in that moment, something extraordinary becomes possible. Part 3. The shadow of the giver. What lies beneath your kindness? Now we go deeper, into territory that might make you uncomfortable. Because what we're about to explore is the part of yourself you've been running from your entire life. Jung called it the shadow. And for the empath, the shadow holds a truth that is almost unbearable to face. Your giving is not entirely selfless. Breathe. Stay with me. This is not an accusation. This is a liberation. The shadow in Jungian psychology contains everything about yourself that you have rejected, denied, or refused to acknowledge. It is the basement of the psyche, the place where you store the parts of yourself that don't match the image you want to project. For the empath, what gets stored in the shadow is often surprising. It's not cruelty or malice, it's need, it's hunger. It's the desperate, aching desire to be loved, to be valued, to be needed. And that desire, buried beneath layers of selflessness, has been driving your behavior in ways you may have never examined. Think about it honestly. When you help someone, what happens inside you? Yes, you feel genuine compassion. Yes, you want to ease their pain. But there is something else, a small, quiet voice that says, now they need me. Now they see me. Now I matter. That voice belongs to the shadow, and it's not evil. It's wounded. It's the voice of a child who learned very early that love was conditional, that you were most visible when you were useful, that the safest way to guarantee connection was to make yourself indispensable. Jung understood this with brutal precision. He said that the shadow is not the enemy, it is the neglected self. And when we refuse to acknowledge it, it doesn't go away. It drives us from below, outside our awareness, shaping our choices in ways we can't see. For the empath, this manifests in patterns that are both painful and familiar. You say yes when you mean no, because saying no might mean losing someone's approval. You overextend yourself because the thought of someone being disappointed in you feels physically unbearable. You tolerate behavior that hurts you because confrontation might mean abandonment. You give and give and give and give, not purely from generosity, but partly from a deep unconscious fear that if you stop giving, you will be alone. This is the shadow of the giver, and until you face it, you will remain trapped in a cycle that looks like love but feels like drowning. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that's exactly what happens. The empath who never examined their shadow will keep attracting the same dynamics. Relationships where they give too much, friendships where they feel used, situations where their boundaries are invisible, and they will blame the world for it. People are takers. People are selfish. No one appreciates me. And while there may be truth in those statements, there is also a deeper truth hiding beneath them. You trained the world to take from you, not consciously, not maliciously, but through years of signaling that your needs don't matter, that you're always available, that you have no limits. The world simply responded to what you offered. And what you offered was everything, with no conditions, no boundaries, and no self-preservation. That is the shadow at work. And here is the miracle of Jungian psychology. The shadow is not just the source of your pain, it is also the source of your pain. It is also the source of your power. In the shadow of the empath lies something extraordinary: the ability to say no, the capacity for righteous anger, the strength to walk away, the courage to choose yourself even when it disappoints others. These are not flaws. They are unlived virtues, qualities that have been pushed into the darkness because somewhere along the way you decided they were incompatible with being a good person. But Jung knew better. He said, the shadow is mostly gold, meaning that most of what we suppress is not darkness at all. It's strength we were afraid to claim, power we were taught to distrust, wholeness we were told was selfish. The day the empath stops pleasing everyone is the day they reach into the shadow and pull out the gold of saying, I matter too, the gold of walking away from relationships that only flow one direction, the gold of sitting with someone's disappointment and knowing it won't kill you. That is not cruelty. That is completeness. Part 4. The collapse, when the empath system shuts down. There is a moment that every empath dreads, the moment when the light goes out. Not the light in the room, the light inside you, the warmth, the care, the thing that made you. One morning you wake up and it's just gone. You look at the people you love and feel nothing. Someone calls you crying and you stare at the phone with a flatness that scares you. A friend needs help, and for the first time in your life you think, I don't care. And that thought horrifies you more tthan anything. Because if you are not the person who cares, then what is left? This is what I call the empath's collapse, and Jung would recognize it immediately, not as a failure, not as a character defect, but as a necessary death. In Jungian psychology, there is a concept called the dark night of the soul. It is borrowed from the mystics, but it maps perfectly onto the psychological process of transformation. The dark night is a period of profound emptiness, confusion, and loss of meaning. It feels like depression. It looks like withdrawal. But it is actually the psyche dismantling a structure that no longer serves it. For the empath, the structure being dismantled is the identity of the giver, the belief that your value comes from what you do for others, the conviction that love must be earned through sacrifice, the assumption that putting yourself last is the same as being good. These beliefs were your foundation, and when the foundation starts to crack, everything builds on top of it shakes. Your relationships feel hollow. Your work feels meaningless. Your social life feels like a performance you can't bear to give anymore. You don't know who you are without the role of the helper, and that not knowing is terrifying. But Jung would tell you this. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the self that was never fully yours to begin with. The persona you built, the tireless giver, the person who never says no, the one who absorbs everyone's pain, that was a construction, a necessary one, perhaps. It helped you survive. It helped you belong. It helped you feel safe in a world that felt overwhelming. But it was not the whole truth of who you are. And now the psyche, in its ruthless wisdom, is tearing that construction down so something more authentic can emerge. Jung called this process enantiodromia, a term he borrowed from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus. It means the tendency of things to turn into their opposite when they've been pushed too far in one direction. When you have been relentlessly selfless, the psyche eventually forces a swing toward self-preservation. When you have spent your entire life caring for others, the unconscious will eventually demand that you care for yourself. And this swing doesn't feel graceful. It feels brutal. It feels like numbness, like apathy, Like becoming a person you don't recognize. The warmth you were known for goes cold. The patience you were admired for disappears. The tolerance you were praised for evaporates. And in its place is a hard, unfamiliar boundary that says, no more. People around you will notice. And they will not be happy about it. They will say you've changed, that you've become cold, that you're not yourself anymore. Some will try to guilt you back into your old role. Some will accuse you of selfishness. Some will simply leave. And that will hurt. It will hurt enormously. Because the empath's greatest fear is exactly this, that setting boundaries means losing love. But here is what Jung understood that the world does not. The people who leave when you stop performing were never connected to you. They were connected to your persona. They loved what you did for them, not who you actually are. And while that is a devastating realization, it is also the beginning of freedom. The collapse is not the death of the empath. It is the death of the empath's slavery, the exhaustion, the numbness, the inability to keep giving. These are not symptoms of brokenness. They are symptoms of a soul demanding its own survival. And if you are in this collapse right now, if you are reading this and thinking, that's exactly where I am, then know this. You are not falling apart. You are being reorganized. The old structure is coming down so that something stronger, something real, something truly yours can be built in its place. The dark night does not last forever, but it lasts as long as it needs to. And what emerges on the other side is not the old you. It is the you that was always there underneath, waiting, patient. Oh, part 5, the awakening of anger, a sacred fire. And then something unexpected happens, something that shocks the empath to their core. You get angry. Not the quiet frustration you felt 1,000 times and swallowed, not the mild irritation you've learned to disguise with a patient smile. Real anger, deep anger, anger that rises from somewhere ancient inside you and fills your entire body with heat. And your first reaction is terror, because empaths don't get angry. Empaths undertend. Empaths forgive. Empaths see the other person's perspective and let things go. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. But now this fire is burning, and you can't put it out. And the targets of it are not strangers. They are the people closest to you. The friend who always calls with problems but never asks about yours. The family member who dismisses your feelings. The partner who takes your presence for granted. The colleague who piles work on you because they know you won't refuse. You look at these relationships with new eyes, and what you see makes the anger burn hotter. You see years of imbalance, years of giving without receiving, years of being the strong one while no one wondered if you needed strength too. And the rage is not just about them, it's about yourself, for allowing it, for enabling it, for smiling through it. Jung would not be surprised by this anger. In fact, he would welcome it, because in Jungian psychology, anger is not a character flaw. It is a signal from the unconscious that a boundary has been violated. And for the empath who has had no boundaries, the anger that finally surfaces is not destructive. It is corrective. It is corrective. It's the psyche's way of redrawing the lines that should have been drawn long ago. Jung understood that healthy anger is a function of the shadow. It lives in the shadow because empaths were taught that anger is incompatible with love, that nice people don't get mad, that if you're truly compassionate, you'll always find a way to understand instead of confront. But this is a lie, and it's a lie that has cost you dearly. Anger is not the opposite of compassion. It is the guardian of it. Without anger, compassion has no boundaries. It becomes a flood that drowns the giver. Without the ability to say, this is not okay, your kindness becomes a resource that anyone can extract without consequence. Think of anger as a fence around a garden. The garden is your love, your empathy, your warmth. Without a fence, anyone can walk in and take what they want, trample the flowers, pull up the roots, leave the soil bare. The fence doesn't destroy the garden, it protects it. And the empath who learns to feel their anger is the empath who finally learns to protect the garden of their own heart. But this process is messy. The anger, when it first breaks through, is not precise, it's not measured, it comes out sideways in snaps and sudden outbursts that seem disproportionate to the moment. You yell about the dishes when what you really mean is, I have been carrying everything for years and nobody seems to notice. You withdraw from a friendship overnight when what you really mean is, I needed you and you were never there. This is normal. This is the shadow material finding its way to the surface after years of being suppressed. It won't come out clean. It will be raw and clumsy, and sometimes it will cause damage. And that's okay. Not because damage is good, but because the alternative, continuing to silence yourself until there's nothing left, is far worse. Jung said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the empath darkness, the anger, the resentment, the exhaustion, the rage at being taken for granted, all of it needs to be brought into the light, not to be acted on blindly, but to be felt, to be acknowledged, to be honored as the signal it truly is. And there is a deeper layer still. Beneath the anger at others lies something even more painful, the anger at yourself for not knowing sooner, for giving away so many years, for loving people who could not love you back in the same way, for being so busy saving others that you forgot to save yourself. That self-directed anger is perhaps the most difficult emotion the empath will ever face, because it touches the core wound, the realization that you were complicit in your own depletion, not because you were weak or foolish, but because you were programmed, conditioned, shaped by a world that rewarded your self-abandonment and punished your self-assertion. And here, in this painful recognition, lies the seed of forgiveness. Not forgiveness of the people who took too much, though that may come later, but forgiveness of yourself, for not knowing what you didn't know, for doing the best you could with the awareness you had, for surviving in the only way you knew how. Your anger is telling you something. Listen to it. It is saying, you deserve more than this. You deserve to be seen, not just to see others. You deserve to receive, not just to give. You deserve to receive, not just to give. You deserve to be whole. And that message is sacred. Part 6, the betrayal of the good person identity. Here is perhaps the most painful part of this entire journey, the moment when you realize that being good has been your cage. The empath's identity is almost always built on a foundation of goodness. You are the good friend, the good daughter or son, the good listener, the good person. This is not just how others see you. It's how you see yourself. It's the core of your self-image. It's the thing that makes you feel safe in the world. And now it's falling apart because you're starting to realize something that feels almost sacrilegious. Being good, the way you've been doing it, was never really about being good. It was about being safe. It was about making sure nobody would leave you, criticize you, reject you, or see the messy, imperfect, needy human being underneath the shining persona. Jung talked about this with uncomfortable directness. He said that many people use morality as a defense mechanism. They become so identified with being good that they lose the capacity for genuine moral choice, because genuine morality requires the freedom to choose. And if being good is compulsive, if it's driven by fear rather than freedom, then it's not really goodness at all. It's control. Read that again. If your kindness is driven by fear of what happens if you're not kind, it is not kindness. It is survival strategy. And this is what the empath must confront: the terrifying possibility that their lifelong identity as the good person was never purely a choice. It was a pattern formed in childhood, reinforced by praise, maintained by fear, and disguised as virtue. This doesn't mean your empathy is fake. It doesn't mean your love isn't real. It means that it has been tangled up with something else, something unconscious, something that needs to be separated out so that your genuine compassion can stand on its own, without the weight of compulsion attached to it. Jung called this the process of differentiation. It means learning to distinguish between the parts of yourself that are truly you and the parts that were imposed from outside, between the kindness that flows naturally from your being and the kindness that is performed to avoid punishment, between the love that is given freely and the love that is given as a transaction, even if the transaction is invisible to everyone, including yourself. This differentiation is excruciating, because when you start to pull apart the threads, you discover that some of your most cherished self-concepts are not as solid as you thought. The friend you helped through their crisis, yes, you cared about them, but part of you also needed to be needed. The relationship you stayed in far too long, yes, you loved them, but part of you also couldn't face the guilt of leaving. The career you chose because it helped people, yes, you believe in the work, but part of you also built your entire sense of worth around it. And there is an even more uncomfortable discovery waiting. Some of your goodness was a form of control, by being the one who always gave, always helped, always showed up. You positioned yourself as indispensable, and being indispensable meant being safe. It meant no one could leave you because they needed you too much. It meant no one could criticize you because you were always above reproach. It meant no one could see your flaws because you kept them buried under an avalanche of generosity. This is not villainy. This is survival. This is a brilliant child's strategy for navigating an emotionally unsafe world. And it should be met with compassion, not condemnation. But it must be seen, because until it is seen, it runs your life from the shadows. This is not something to be ashamed of. This is human. This is what it looks like to have a psyche that is complex and layered and in need of integration. But it has to be acknowledged, because until it is, you will continue to operate from a divided self, part of you giving from love and part of you giving from fear. And that division is what has been exhausting you all along. The day the empath stops pleasing everyone is also the day they stop needing to be the good person, not because they become a bad person, but because they transcend the binary altogether. They step out of the cage of good and into the open air of whole, and wholeness, as Jung taught, includes everything: the light and the shadow, the giver and the one who receives, the soft heart and the fierce boundary, the compassion and the anger. This is individuation. This is becoming real. Part 7, the withdrawal, learning to be alone without guilt. And so you withdraw, not with a plan, not with a strategy, just with a deep animal need to be alone, to stop, to go quiet, to close the door and sit in the silence and not have to be anything for anyone. At first, it feels wrong. It feels selfish. It feels like you're abandoning the people who depend on you. Your phone lights up with messages you don't answer. Invitations arrive that you decline. People reach out and you pull back. And every time you choose yourself over someone else's expectation, a voice inside you says, "You're a terrible person." That voice is the old persona, and it is fighting for its life. Jung understood that the process of individuation, of becoming your true self, always involves conflict with the old identity. The person you were built to be does not surrender quietly. It uses guilt as its weapon. It uses shame. It says, "Remember who you are. Remember what you're supposed to do. Remember that without you, everyone falls apart." But you know what? They don't fall apart. That's the secret that the empath's ego doesn't want you to discover. The people you've been holding together are more capable than you gave them credit for. The friend you always rescued, they figure it out on their own. The family member you always soothed, they find other resources. The partner you always propped up, they start standing on their own feet. Not all of them. Some relationships won't survive this shift. Some people genuinely needed you to function. And when you stop functioning for them, the dynamic collapses. And that is painful, but it is also revealing, because it shows you which relationships were built on mutual respect and which were built on your willingness to sacrifice yourself. The withdrawal is not forever. It is a season, a necessary winter, a time when the soil of your soul lies fallow so that something new can grow. Jung would recognize this immediately as the incubation period of transformation, the cocoon stage, the time when the caterpillar dissolves into formless matter before it reorganizes into something with wings. And during this time, you will feel lost. You will feel purposeless. You will wonder what you're good for if you're not taking care of someone. You will sit in your quiet house and feel the absence of all the noise you used to fill your life with, and it will feel both peaceful and terrifying. Let it be both. Let it be contradictory. Let yourself not know who you are for a while. Because the person you were, the tireless giver, the infinite well of compassion, the one who never said no, that person was extraordinary. But that person was also a fraction of who you really are. And the rest of you, the part that has needs, the part that has anger, the part that wants to be held instead of always holding, the part that wants to be selfish sometimes, the part that wants to stare at a wall and think about nothing, the part that doesn't want to fix anyone, including yourself, that part has been waiting in the dark for a very long time. The withdrawal is how you invite it into the light. Something else happens during this time that you might not expect. Memories surface. Not dramatic memories necessarily, small ones. A moment when you were 7 and you wanted something and were told you were being selfish. A time when you cried and someone told you to be strong. A night when you needed comfort and no one came. These fragments float up from the unconscious like pieces of a shipwreck rising to the surface, and they carry an emotional charge that can be overwhelming. This is the psyche doing its work. In the silence, without the distraction of constantly attending to others, your own unprocessed experiences finally have space to be felt, and they need to be felt. Not analyzed, not fixed, not turned into a lesson or a growth opportunity, just felt, held, acknowledged. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what he didn't say, and what you need to hear, is that the process of becoming yourself often looks like disappearing for a while. It looks like canceling plans. It looks like turning off your phone. It looks like saying, "I love you, but I can't right now." It looks from the outside like giving up. But from the inside, it feels like finally breathing after years underwater. So if you're in this withdrawal right now, if you're reading this in a quiet room with the phone on silent and the blinds drawn, know that you are not running away from life. You are running toward yourself. and that is the bravest thing you will ever do. Part 8, the archetype of the wounded healer. There is an ancient archetype that Jung studied extensively, an image that appears across cultures, religions, and mythologies throughout human history. It is called the wounded healer. This archetype describes a figure who can only heal others because they themselves have been wounded. Their power doesn't come from perfection, it comes from their pain. Their broken places are not obstacles to their gift, they are the gift. If you are an empath, this archetype lives inside you. It always has. But you've only been living half of it. You've been living the healer part. The part that tends to others, that mends what is broken in the people around you, that pours out care and compassion and understanding without end. You've been magnificent at it. People have come to you damaged and left feeling whole. You have been the person who held the space when no one else would. You have been the one who stayed when everyone else walked away. But the wounded part, the part of you that is bleeding, that part you've been hiding, tucking away, denying. Because how can the healer be wounded? How can the strong one be weak? How can the person everyone leans on be the one who is falling? Jung knew the answer. The healer must be wounded. The wound is not a contradiction of the gift, it is the source of it. But here is the critical insight. The wound must be acknowledged. It must be tended to. It must be tended to. It must be integrated. If the healer ignores their own wound, if they keep pouring out without ever pouring in, the wound doesn't heal. It festers, and eventually it poisons everything. This is what happens when the empath burns out. The unattended wound begins to leak. The compassion becomes resentment. The patience becomes passive aggression. The love becomes obligation. And the empath who once felt everything so deeply begins to feel nothing at all. That numbness is the wound screaming for attention. That emptiness is the healer collapsing under the weight of their own unhealed pain. Jung said that we cannot change anything until we accept it. And for the empath, the first thing that must be accepted is this. You are not an endless resource. You are a human being. A human being with needs, with limits, with pain that deserves the same tenderness you've been giving to everyone else. The mythology of the wounded healer appears everywhere once you know where to look. Chiron, the centaur of Greek myth, was a healer who could cure any ailment except his own wound. The shaman in indigenous traditions must undergo a dismemberment, a symbolic death, before they can heal others. The therapist who entered the field because of their own suffering. The counselor who chose their path because they knew what it felt like to be lost. In every case, the pattern is the same. The wound is the doorway to the gift. But the doorway must be entered, not avoided. And entering it means doing the one thing the empath has always been afraid to do, turning the healing inward. The wounded healer archetype teaches us that true healing power comes from integration, not from denial. The most powerful healers are not the ones who have it all together. They are the ones who have fallen apart and learned to reassemble themselves, who have faced their own darkness and come back with lanterns, who have stopped pretending to be invulnerable and allowed their vulnerability to become their deepest strength. This is what is available to you on the other side of the collapse. Not a return to the old pattern of endless giving, but a new way of being, one where you heal from the inside out, where your compassion is rooted in self-knowledge rather than self-abandonment, where your boundaries are not walls, but doorways, opened by choice, never by compulsion. The wounded healer does not stop caring. They learn to care differently. They learn that the most profound act of empathy is not to absorb another person's pain, but to stand beside them in it, not to carry their burden, but to light the path while they carry their own. And they learn this by first doing it for themselves, by sitting with their own pain instead of running from it, by allowing themselves to be held, by accepting help without guilt, by being the patient, not just the doctor, by being the one who needs, not just the one who gives. This is not weakness. This is the completion of the archetype, the healer who heals themselves, and that is the most powerful thing in the world. Part 9, the return, coming back differently. After the withdrawal comes something unexpected, a stirring, a return of energy, not the frantic, people-pleasing energy of before, something quieter, steadier, something that comes from the center of you instead of from the demands of others. You begin to want connection again, but differently. You find yourself reaching out, but only to specific people, people who feel safe, people who see you and not just what you do for them. You notice that your circle has gotten smaller, and instead of feeling loss, you feel relief. Like a garden that has been pruned, there's more light now, more room to breathe. This is what Jung described as the return from the unconscious. After the descent, after the dark night, after the dismantling, there is a reconstruction. But the structure that's rebuilt is not the same as the one that fell. It's stronger because it includes all of you. The light and the shadow, the giver and the receiver, the healer and the healed. You start to notice changes that others may find subtle, but that feel revolutionary to you. You're in a conversation and someone starts to tell you about their problems, and instead of immediately absorbing their pain, you listen without drowning. You hear them without losing yourself. You feel compassion without compulsion. You hold space without disappearing into it. And for the first time, you realize that this is what real empathy looks like. Not the old version, where you became a vessel for everyone else's emotions, but a new version, where you stand beside people in their pain without climbing into it, where your heart stays open but your boundaries stay intact, where you can say, I hear you and I'm sorry you're going through this, without adding, tell me how to fix it. You notice something else too. Your presence feels different to people. Before, when you were running on empty, your care had a frantic quality to it. People could sense, even if they couldn't name it, that your giving came with a hidden urgency, an undertow of need beneath the generosity. But now, with the persona relaxed and the shadow integrated, your presence is calmer, more grounded. People feel held by you in a way that is different from before. Not because you're doing more, but because you're present more. You're actually there, not performing being there, not enduring being there, but genuinely, fully, quietly there. This is the integrated empath, the one who has done the inner work, the one who has faced their shadow, honored their wound, endured the collapse, survived the withdrawal, and come back to the world not as the old selfless martyr, but as a complete human being. Jung called this the self, with a capital S, the totality of who you are, not the ego, which is just the conscious part, not the persona, which is just the mask, not the shadow, which is just the repressed part, but all of it, unified, integrated, working together. The self doesn't need to please everyone because its worth doesn't depend on external validation. The self can say no because it knows that saying no to one thing is saying yes to something else. The self can sit in stillness without guilt because it understands that stillness is not emptiness but fullness. And here's the beautiful paradox. The empath who stops pleasing everyone actually becomes more loving, not less. Because the love they give is no longer contaminated by fear, by neediness, by the unconscious bargain of, I'll take care of you if you promise not to leave me. Now their love is clean. It flows because it wants to, not because it has to. It is offered freely, without strings, without conditions, without the hidden ledger of unspoken expectations. And people feel the difference. They feel that this love is real in a way the old love never quite was, even though the old love was louder and more constant. The old love was a river that flooded everything. The new love is a well that people can draw from without draining it. Because the empath who has found themselves is an empath who has constantly been replenished from the inside. This is the return, not to the old life, but to life itself, to connection that is chosen rather than compelled, to relationships that are mutual rather than one-sided, to a way of being in the world that honors your gift without sacrificing your soul. Part 10, Setting Boundaries as a Spiritual Practice. Let's talk about the word that terrifies every empath, boundaries. For most of your life, that word has felt like a foreign language. You understood it intellectually. You could see that other people had them. But for you, the very concept of drawing a line felt like an act of violence against the other person, against the relationship, against your own nature. Because how do you set a boundary when you can feel what the other person feels? How do you say no when you can literally sense the disappointment radiating from them? How do you protect yourself when your entire system is designed to protect others? This is the empath's dilemma, and Jung understood its depth. In Jungian psychology, boundaries are not walls. They are the definition of the self. Without boundaries, you don't know where you end, and the other person begins. And for the empath, this blurriness is chronic. You feel someone else's sadness and you think it's yours. You absorb someone's anxiety and you carry it for days without realizing it came from outside. Jung spoke about this in terms of psychic inflation and deflation. Inflation is when you unconsciously merge with someone else's psyche, taking on their emotions, their problems, their pain as your own. Deflation is when you lose your own sense of self entirely in service of another. Both are consequences of having no psychological boundary, and both will destroy you if left unchecked. So, setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of psychological survival. It is the empath saying, I can feel your pain, but it is not mine to carry. I can see your need, but it is not mine to fill. I can love you without absorbing you. But here is what makes boundaries a spiritual practice, which is what they truly are for the empath. Every time you set a boundary, you are affirming the reality of your own soul. You are saying, I exist. I have edges. I am not just a mirror that reflects whatever is placed in front of it. I am a being with my own light, my own needs, my own sacred interior space. And that affirmation, repeated over and over in 1,000 small moments, is what gradually rebuilds the self that was lost. The first boundaries will feel impossible. You will set a boundary and immediately want to take it back. You will say no and then lie awake all night wondering if you've ruined the relationship. You will decline an invitation and then spend 3 days composing a mental apology. This is normal. This is the old pattern, resisting change. But each time you hold the boundary, something shifts. A little more of the old persona falls away. A little more of the true self emerges. And over time, the guilt doesn't disappear entirely, but it quiets. It becomes a background noise rather than a siren. And in the new silence, you hear something you haven't heard in years. Your own voice, not the voice that says, be nice, be helpful, be available, but the voice that says, what do I need right now? What is true for me? What do I actually want? And you realize, maybe for the first time, that you have answers to those questions. You have preferences and desires and opinions that were always there, just buried under the avalanche of everyone else's needs. And pulling them out, dusting them off, holding them up to the light, this is not selfish. This is the most essential work you will ever do. Jung said that individuation is the process by which a person becomes the definite, unique being they are. And you cannot become unique if you have no edges. You cannot become definite if you are constantly dissolving into the people around you. You cannot become yourself if you are endlessly becoming everyone else. Boundaries give you shape, and shape gives you substance, and substance gives you the ability to truly, fully, honestly love, not from depletion, but from abundance. Part 11, the guilt that doesn't belong to you, but the guilt. Let's not pretend it's easy to navigate, because the guilt that empaths feel when they stop pleasing people is not ordinary guilt. It's not the rational guilt you feel when you've done something wrong. It's something deeper, something older, something that was planted in you long before you had the language to name it. This guilt says, if someone is unhappy and you could have helped, their unhappiness is your fault. It says your needs are not as important as theirs. It says you exist to serve. Anything less is a betrayal. And this guilt, when you examine it closely, often has nothing to do with the present moment. It is an echo, a reverberation from childhood. From the first time you learned that your value was tied to what you gave, Jung would call this a complex, a cluster of emotionally charged memories, beliefs, and patterns that operate autonomously in the unconscious. The guilt complex of the empath is one of the most powerful because it was forged in the most vulnerable period of life and reinforced every day since. Maybe your mother was unhappy and you felt responsible for cheering her up. Maybe your father was absent and you became the emotional anchor for the family. Maybe there was chaos in your home and the only way you found stability was by managing everyone's feelings. Maybe you were praised every time you sacrificed yourself and ignored every time you expressed a need. Whatever the specific story, the result is the same. A deep unconscious belief that your feelings don't matter, that asking for something makes you selfish, that taking care of yourself means neglecting someone else. And this belief is a lie, a powerful, convincing, deeply rooted lie, but a lie nonetheless. Jung said that the greatest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of the parent. And many empaths carry exactly this. They carry the emotional weight that was never theirs to begin with. They feel guilt that was installed in them by people who needed them to feel guilty in order to stay controlled, stay available, stay small. Releasing this guilt is perhaps the single most transformative thing the empath can do. And it doesn't happen overnight. It happens in moments, in micro decisions, in the daily practice of reminding yourself that you are not responsible for other people's feelings. This doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're indifferent to suffering. It means you stop confusing care with control. You stop believing that if you just try hard enough you can make everyone okay. You stop treating your own pain as less valid than everyone else's. And slowly, as the guilt loosens its grip, you discover something astonishing. The world doesn't end when you stop carrying it. The people you were so afraid of disappointing, they adjust, they adapt, they find other resources. And some of them, the ones who truly love you, actually breathe a sigh of relief because they never wanted you to sacrifice yourself. They wanted you to be happy. They wanted you to be free. The guilt doesn't belong to you. It never did. It was given to you by a world that profits from your compliance, by systems that need people who never say no, by relationships that are structured around your willingness to be the one who always gives in. And letting it go, really, truly letting it go, is the empath's deepest rebellion. Part 12, Individuation, the empath's true calling. Now we arrive at the heart of it all, the concept that ties everything together, the process that Jung considered the most important journey a human being can undertake, individuation. The word itself tells you what it means to become an individual, to become undivided, to integrate all the parts of yourself, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, into a unified whole. For the empath, individuation is not optional, it is survival. Because the empath who does not individuate will be consumed by the very gift that makes them extraordinary. Their empathy, uncontained and undirected, will eat them alive. But the empath who does individuate, who does the hard work of self-discovery, who faces the shadow, who reclaims their anger, who learns to set boundaries, who releases the guilt, who sits in the silence long enough to hear their own voice, that person becomes something rare, something the world desperately needs. They become a conscious empath, someone who feels deeply but is not controlled by their feelings, someone who gives generously but is not depleted by their giving, someone who loves fiercely but is not destroyed by their love. Jung said that individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming complete, and completeness includes mess. It includes contradiction. It includes the ability to be both tender and fierce, both open and boundaried, both caring and self-protective. The individuated empath doesn't stop feeling. They feel more than ever, but the feeling flows through them instead of getting stuck. They become like a river instead of a dam. The water moves, it touches everything, but it doesn't stagnate, it doesn't flood, it doesn't break. And here is what Jung saw coming. He predicted that the world would need people like this. People who could hold space for the collective pain without being destroyed by it. People who could stand in the middle of chaos and radiate calm. People who could bridge the gap between the rational and the emotional, between the conscious and the unconscious, between the individual and the collective. He called them the bridge builders of the psyche. And that is what you are becoming, not by going back to the old pattern, not by putting the mask back on, not by becoming the endless giver again, but by becoming something new entirely, someone who gives from fullness, someone who feels without drowning, someone who connects without losing themselves. This is your true calling, not to please everyone, not to please everyone, not to carry everyone, but to become fully, completely, unapologetically yourself. And in doing so, to show others that it's possible. Because when an empath individuates, when they stop apologizing for their nature and start honoring it, they don't just transform themselves, they transform every relationship they're in. They transform every relationship they're in. They transform every room they enter. They give other people permission to be real, to be imperfect, to be whole. That is the gift, not the old gift of self-sacrifice, but the new gift of self-realization, and it is infinitely more powerful. Part 13, the empath and psychic contagion, why you absorb what isn't yours. Before we talk about what love looks like on the other side, we need to address something that empaths experience every single day, but rarely have language for. The phenomenon of absorbing emotions that do not belong to you. You know exactly what this feels like. You walk into a room feeling perfectly fine, and within minutes you're anxious. You have a phone conversation with your mother and hang up feeling heavy, drained, like someone draped a wet blanket over your entire nervous system. You sit next to a stranger on the bus who looks sad, and by the time you reach your stop, You're the one fighting tears. This isn't imagination. This isn't weakness. Jung would say, this is the reality of the psychic field. Jung believed that the unconscious is not purely individual. It extends outward. It connects. He observed that people in close proximity, particularly those with thin psychological boundaries, can pick up on each other's emotional states without any words being exchanged. He called this participation mystique, a term borrowed from anthropologist Lucien Lévy-Bruhl. It describes a state where the boundary between self and other dissolves. For most people, participation mystique occurs in extreme situations, in crowds, during crises, in moments of deep intimacy. But for the empath, it is a constant state. You are perpetually porous, perpetually open, and this means you are perpetually at risk of being flooded by emotions that were never yours. Think about the implications of this. If you walk through life absorbing the anxiety of strangers, the sadness of friends, the frustration of colleagues, the unresolved grief of your parents, how would you ever know what you actually feel? How would you distinguish your own emotional truth from the emotional noise of everyone around you? The answer for most empaths is that you can't, or rather, you never learned how. And this is why the withdrawal is so essential. It's not just about rest, it's about clearing the signal. Imagine a radio picking up 12 stations at once. The noise is overwhelming. You can't make out a single song. The withdrawal is turning down all the other stations so you can finally hear your own frequency. And when you hear it, when you sit in enough silence for enough time that the borrowed emotions begin to settle and your own emotional truth rises to the surface, it is a revelation. You discover that much of what you thought was your anxiety is actually the anxiety of the people around you. That much of what you thought was your sadness is actually the grief of a world you've been unconsciously channeling. That you are lighter than you thought, calmer than you thought, more at peace than you thought. This doesn't mean you stop feeling the world. You will always feel the world. That is your nature, and it is not going to change. But you learn to distinguish between what flows through you and what belongs to you, between the emotions you are receiving and the emotions you are generating. And that distinction, once you learn to make it, changes everything. Jung would say this is a function of strengthening the ego. Not ego in the colloquial sense of arrogance, but ego in the psychological sense, the conscious center of personality, the part of you that says, I am. For the empath, the ego has been weak, not because the empath is weak, but because it was never given room to develop. It was always in service, always adapting, always dissolving into whoever was nearby. Individuation strengthens the ego. It gives you an eye that is solid enough to feel without being overwhelmed, present enough to connect without merging, strong enough to stand in someone else's storm without being swept away. And this is not a loss of empathy, it is the evolution of it. The old empathy was reactive, unconscious, boundaryless. The new empathy is intentional, aware, and chosen. You feel someone's pain not because you can't help it, but because you choose, and you can set it down when you need to. Because it's their pain, not yours. You held it for a moment, you honored it, and then you gave it back. That is the empath's maturity, and it only becomes possible after the long, difficult process of learning to say, this feeling is not mine. Part 14, a new way of loving. So what does love look like on the other side? It looks like a person who can hold your hand without gripping it, who can sit with your pain without trying to take it away, who can be present without being consumed, who can say, I love you and I also need to go home now, without guilt, without apology, without fear. It looks like relationships that breathe, where there is space between two people that isn't emptiness but trust, where silence isn't awkward but intimate, where being apart doesn't mean something is wrong but means both people are whole enough to stand alone. The empath who has done the work of individuation loves differently than the empath who hasn't. The old empath loves by merging. They dissolve their boundaries and pour themselves into the other person. It feels intense. It feels romantic. It feels like total devotion. But it is also suffocating for both people. The new empath loves by standing beside. They maintain their shape while being close. They offer their presence without offering their identity. They say, I am here with you, not I am you. And this kind of love, while it may feel less dramatic, is far more sustainable. It doesn't burn out. It doesn't breed resentment. It doesn't create the awful cycle of giving and withdrawing that characterizes so many of the empath's relationships. Jung spoke about this as the conjunctio, the sacred marriage, not between two people, but between the inner masculine and inner feminine, between the ego and the unconscious, between the self and the other. This inner union is what makes real outer union possible, because you cannot truly love another person until you have a self to love them with. And the empath who has sacrificed their self on the altar of pleasing everyone has nothing left to bring to the table. They bring their mask, they bring their performance, they bring their exhaustion disguised as devotion, but they don't bring themselves. The work of individuation is the work of recovering that self so you can offer it freely, not as a sacrifice, but as a gift given from wholeness, not from emptiness, a gift that is chosen, not compelled. And that kind of gift changes the nature of every relationship it touches. It allows the other person to relax, to stop performing to stop pretending that everything you give them isn't accompanied by an invisible bill they're somehow supposed to pay. The new empath releases everyone around them from the unspoken contract that the old empath could never see. And in that release, real intimacy becomes possible for the first time. Part 15, The Quiet Revolution. You might be waiting for the triumphant ending, the moment when the empath transforms and the world applauds, when everyone understands, when the struggle resolves into something neat and complete. That's not how it works. The empath's transformation is not loud. It is the quietest revolution you will ever witness. It happens in the small moments. In the pause before you say yes, the pause where you check with yourself first, in the conversation where you let someone sit with their own discomfort instead of rushing to fix it, in the evening where you choose your own company and feel not lonely but full. Nobody throws a parade for the person who learns to say no. Nobody writes headlines about the empath who finally stopped carrying the world. But that doesn't make it any less monumental. Because what you are doing right now in this messy, uncertain, guilt-ridden, beautiful process of becoming yourself is one of the most courageous acts a human being can perform. You are dismantling a pattern that was built into you before you could speak. You are rewriting a story that was authored by people who needed you to stay small. You are choosing, maybe for the first time in your life, to matter to yourself as much as you matter to everyone else. And this revolution extends beyond you. Every empath who reclaims themselves gives silent permission to every other empath watching. The friend who notices you said no and the sky didn't fall. The colleague who sees you leave on time without apologizing. The family member who watches you take space and realizes that maybe they're allowed to take space too. You don't have to preach. You don't have to explain. You just have to live it. And the living of it sends ripples outward that you will never fully see, but that matter more than you know. Jung knew the weight of this. He knew it was not easy. He knew it was often lonely. He knew that the people who do this work are rarely understood by the people who haven't. But he also knew something else, that these quiet revolutions, these private transformations, these invisible shifts from self-abandonment to self-realization are what change the world, not from the top down, but from the inside out, one healed empath at a time, one reclaimed boundary at a time, one reclaimed boundary at a time, one reclaimed boundary at a time. You are part of that revolution right now. Part 16. What they don't tell you about the other side. There are things about this transformation that nobody prepares you for. Not the books, not the therapists, not even Jung himself. And I want to be honest about them because the empath who is in the middle of this process deserves the truth, not a fairy tale. The first thing nobody tells you is that it's lonely, not the old loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't see you, a different kind. The loneliness of standing in your truth while the world expects the old version of you. The loneliness of knowing something about yourself that you can't easily explain. The loneliness of growth, which always creates distance from those who haven't grown in the same direction. The second thing nobody tells you is that some days you'll miss the mask. You'll miss the simplicity of knowing your role. You'll miss the way people responded to the old you. The gratitude, the dependency, the sense of purpose that came from being needed. Wholeness is more nuanced than martyrdom, and nuance doesn't always feel good. The third thing nobody tells you is that the people who love the mask will grieve it, and their grief can look like anger. It can look like accusations. It can look like the silent withdrawal of affection designed to punish you back into compliance. And watching people you love struggle with the new you is one of the hardest things you will ever endure. But here is what they also don't tell you, the part that makes everything worth it. You will wake up one morning and realize you feel rested. Not just physically, but at the level of the soul. You will notice that the chronic tension in your shoulders has softened, that the knot in your stomach that you thought was permanent has begun to unwind, that the fog that has hung over your mind for years has lifted just enough for you to see clearly again. You will have a conversation where you say exactly what you mean, without editing, without softening, without performing, and instead of the catastrophe you expected, the other person will nod. They will understand. They might even thank you for being honest. You will spend an evening alone not because you're avoiding the world, but because you genuinely prefer your own company. And instead of guilt, you will feel something almost foreign. Contentment. The quiet satisfaction of being enough, just as you are, without doing anything for anyone. You will look in the mirror and, perhaps for the first time, recognize the person looking back. Not the helper, not the healer, not the persona, but you, the real one, the one who was there all along, waiting beneath layers of accommodation and self-erasure. Jung understood that this moment, the moment of genuine self-recognition, is the culmination of the individuation process. It is not an endpoint. It is a beginning, but it is a beginning that changes everything that follows. Part 17, coming home to yourself. We have come a long way together, through the mask and the shadow, through the collapse and the anger, through the guilt and the withdrawal and the slow, sacred process of rebuilding. And now, at the end, there is just this. You, in your own space, in your own silence, in the life that you are learning to live on your own terms, not perfectly, never perfectly, but honestly, you still feel everything. That hasn't changed. When you walk into a room, you still sense what no one else does. You still notice the sadness behind the smile. You still feel the tension in the air. You still carry the gift that you were born with, but now you carry it differently, like a lantern instead of a weight. You hold it out in front of you, and it lights the way, your way, not just everyone else's. There will be days when the old patterns pull at you, when the guilt creeps back, when someone's disappointment makes you question everything, when you wonder if you were better before, when you were endlessly giving, endlessly available, endlessly. And on those days, remember this. Jung said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And he was right. It is terrifying. But it is also the only path to peace. The empath who stops pleasing everyone does not become less. They become more honest, more present, more alive, more capable of the kind of love that actually heals. Not the kind that just manages, but the kind that transforms. You were never meant to carry the world. You were meant to walk through it with your eyes open, with your heart intact, with your boundaries drawn in love rather than fear, with your compassion flowing from fullness rather than depletion. Jung saw it coming. He saw that people like you, the deep feelers, the sensitives, the ones who sense what others cannot, would one day reach a breaking point. And he knew that the breaking point was not the end. It was the beginning of everything, the beginning of you. Not the version of you the world demanded, not the mask, not the martyr, not the bottomless well, just you, whole, real, finally home. And if you're sitting there right now in the quiet, feeling something shift inside you, feeling something old loosen its grip, feeling something old loosen its grip, feeling something new stirring in the space that was opened up, then you already know. The journey has begun. And you don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to do it honestly, one boundary at a time, one honest word at a time, one gentle, fierce, sacred no at a time. Welcome home. We've reached the end of this journey together. But for you, this is just the beginning. We've walked through the psychology of the empath through Jung's lens, through the mask, the shadow, the collapse, the anger, the guilt, the withdrawal, and the slow, beautiful return to yourself. Now I invite you to take one small step today. Not a dramatic transformation, just one honest moment with yourself. One boundary you've been afraid to set. One no you've been holding back. One quiet evening where you choose yourself without apology. That's enough. That's everything. If this video touched something in you, leave a comment. Tell me what resonated. Tell me where you are in this journey. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who has been giving and giving until they forgot they existed, share this with them. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember what Jung taught us. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. I'll see you in the next one.